So I'm just going to hand over to our panelists and get started with the discussion.
Can you hear me? This might work. So I have to hold this one. Okay, real pleasure to be here. I'm not esteemed, we're all esteemed. And there's an important message there, because what I've got to say is that that's part of the problem, is that we position ourselves as either there or there, and which is a kind of colonial project. So what I'm going to... it's all right. What I'm going to be talking about is decolonizing the university, radical but also insurgent pedagogy, because I've been kind of interested in insurgent pedagogy, not least because I think that's what I've been doing for the last 40 years or something, and I found a label, yeah. So it's been less than 10 years since universities have begun to pay any real attention to the issue of racism in higher education. Even now, much of the sector is still trapped in this institutional inertia that has its roots two different sources, I think. First, there is the historical and material antecedents of the university as an institution essentially born to serve the interests of white male elites. However, some of the formal trappings of elitism may have disappeared. The fact that we still talk about first-class, second-class degrees, third-class degrees, and the perverse obsession with league tables continues to fuel a narrative of elitism and the attendant symbolic violence that comes with elitism. The second reason is that there still exist huge blind spots about the existence of everyday privileging of whiteness. This is directly related to two factors. First, a lack of representation of non-white staff in positions of power, and second, a delusion amongst academics who occupy powerful positions that their own critical faculties render them incapable of displaying prejudiced beliefs. So in the present moment, we are seeing a raft of policies and initiatives developed to address this question of race in HE. We hear about decolonising the curriculum. It's become quite fashionable now. I'm just waiting for Boris Johnson to say, I support decolonising the curriculum. We've got race equality charters, unconscious bias training. Problem with that is that if you become conscious of your bias, does that make you not biased? Or are you just a conscious bias now? Diversity awareness, that's a bit old now, but it's still there. Usually on a computer program somewhere. Have you had that? Online? You become aware by interacting with a screen. We've got admissions and contextual data. Bristol does it now. We kind of lower our entry requirements for these people. And Black History Month, etc. Yeah? So those things kind of... we know that there is nothing new here. If you've been involved in anti-racist work for the last 30, 40 years, you know that we did this in the 80s, in the 90s. Stephen Lawrence came along, and then we kind of rebooted it, yeah? So this is not new. The only thing that really surprises me, having gone through this very same debate within local government over 25 years ago, I used to be what was disparagingly termed a race trainer. Any more race trainers here? We were like this kind of fifth column that were, yeah. But that's another story. I haven't got time for that. The question for you is, why has it taken so long for universities, the most enlightened spaces in our society, to get here? Also begs the question, what does it tell us about the nature of UK universities, yeah? Still, one must not begrudge these new, old initiatives. They are to be welcomed, but ultimately, as Frederick Douglass, in a speech on West Indian emancipation in New York in August 1857 said, "Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will." That's a kind of truism. So I've come to believe that the only way to get sustained and meaningful change is to mount an insurgency. Probably been doing that for the last 40 years, but still, we need to keep doing it, yeah? It's not enough to simply expect the sector, which is full of really nice, educated people, to change without a demand. Indeed, in fact, in one of the workshops earlier on today, somebody talked about, about white privilege and, when will white privilege stand aside and allow other people access to privilege? It's an interesting question. But as I say, it's not enough to expect the sector to somehow, just become enlightened and, wake up unbiased. Indeed, it is this self-deception as a bastion of reason, research, and research itself, the history of research is the history of colonialism, of eugenics, of exploitation, of the destruction of the planet. Let's be honest. We need to relabel. This isn't about research. It's about dominance. Because most of the research that has been done has had... Henri Giroux wrote a book, University in Chains. You must read it. He said that 70% of research that's funded in the States has something to do with the military-industrial complex, or to do with arms and weaponry and control. So we do need to ask this question. Who is research for? Is it for black people? So the problem is that we've got this logic, that we're full of logic and enlightenment and reason. And as I said, that renders universities blind to their own complicity in colonialism, imperialism, capitalist exploitation, and the destruction of the planet. And the very same people who have done these things, then we're saying, oh, you can save us. There's disconnect there, isn't there? So insurgency, because of its association with armed struggles, feels like a dangerous word. Nevertheless, for me, so I probably won't put it on my Twitter feed or on my Facebook, because I know what will happen. Some computer program is going to pick me up as a dangerous insurgent. Nevertheless, for me, to be an insurgent, maybe we should edit that insurgent bit out, is to operate, but this is going live, isn't it, so we can't. Yeah. So for me to operate as an insurgent is to operate from below. Side with what Spivak says, the subaltern, and to resist becoming co-opted into the very same system that one is seeking to radically change, yeah? As Spivak notes, to work with a self-contained vision of the West is to ignore its production by the imperial project. So this is about the negation of these institutions, not the changing of these institutions. These institutions have to be reborn. Following very much from the insights into the colonial project from writers such as Gayatri Spivak and Frantz Fanon, in her book Decolonizing Methodologies, Linda Tuhai notes, the reach of imperialism into our heads challenges those who belong to colonized communities to understand how this occurred, to recover ourselves, to claim a space in which to develop a sense of authentic humanity. That's basically the project that we're interested in. And in this regard, the radical pedagogical project being talked about today serves two quite different functions for me. First, it certainly is a project of excavating and challenging what Errol Lawrence, in his chapter in The Empire Strikes Back, referred to as common sense racist ideologies. For those like me who are the subjects and victims of racial violence, both physical and symbolic, radical pedagogies represent a means for healing and recovering our history and identity, or borrowing from Stuart Hall, of being and becoming. For me, that's what radical pedagogy, it might be something else for a white person, it might be to deal with their unconscious bias. For me, it's not about that. It's something completely, and we need to think about that. For different people, this means different things. Don't get me wrong, universities are very nice places. I mean, how can't we like these beautiful buildings, and even if we get lost now and again? And as an insurgent academic, I do not deny the university is and can be a place of refuge, but equally positioned thus as a refugee is not something to be desired. Who wants to be a refugee in this world? Nobody. And so as Moulton and Harney in their book argue, the role of the insurgent, or what they term the subversive academic, in the university is to, and I quote here, so don't say this, I'm saying this, because my VC, if he thinks I'm saying it, it'll probably suck me. Quote, sneak into the university and steal what you can. To abuse its hospitality, to spite its mission, to join its refugee colony, its gypsy encampment, but to be in, but not of. Yeah? And we all remember the old in and against the state and all that kind of stuff. Whilst I've worked hard at assimilating into the university over the past 25 years, I've never managed to shed the imposter syndrome. I still feel like somebody's going to tap me on the shoulder and say, what are you doing here? So I meticulously carry my ID card, because I know that's the only thing that saves me. And it's usually some kind of person who's working for some outsourced company questioning my legitimacy. Yeah? So this imposter syndrome is still there. I've now come to realize that this feeling has an objective reality, which is, how can I ever belong to an institution that seeks to deny my humanity, my worth? Indeed, in the sense of not belonging, of ongoing unease, of positioned as the other, that serves as an important reminder that below the surface, most UK universities still function as colonial entities. We need to realise that. But this is only half the story. The fact that I'm still standing, still facing up and confronting white supremacy, and I've managed to build deep alliances with black and white colleagues, it gives me hope that change is possible. Indeed, in developing my thinking around anti-racist pedagogy and decolonisation and insurgent pedagogy, I've become acutely conscious that the job of the educator is not so much to articulate a correct version of history, but to equip students with the critical tools to understand the nature of hegemony, dominance, and the construction of ideas, identities, and epistemology. So we should stop students being afraid of these two words, ontology and epistemology. They're difficult but very dangerous words, and we need to keep fighting for that. So, in this regard, one seeks to avoid a simplistic flipping where one ends up privileging the subaltern consciousness. Yeah, we should idealize a subaltern consciousness. It's a necessary consciousness of survival, but it's not a chosen consciousness. Does that make sense? Yeah, there's nothing chosen about being a refugee, about being in a gypsy encampment, but it's a necessary consciousness. Following Gautrey Spivak, the task of the radical educator is not about defining identities or playing a politics of identity, which I think we've become trapped in over the last 10, 15 years. I mean, postmodernism kind of came and went. It's nothing to do with my struggle. But it almost kind of appropriated the black struggle. It almost appropriated these concrete historical struggles and put them into some kind of abstract thing. What Stephen Andon said, it took us from the world into the word. Yes, we need the word, but it always has to be in the world. So we need to avoid this error, which was one of the fatal errors of multiculturalist education. But we need to understand and uncover the mechanisms of structural dominance. That's primarily. And then when you do that, then nature will take its course. Then people will be able to find their own sense of being and becoming. So my research sometimes takes place in the open, a bit like this now in the lecture theatre, increasingly on social media. And Muna, where's Muna? She gone. I blame her for that because she's always tweeting. I keep retweeting what she tweets. So it takes place sometimes in social media, sometimes in the university committee room. Have you been in the committee room? Where they have this sigh when you enter the room. This person's going to be a prickly, uncivilized, yeah? Or even in the staff meeting. But very often it's in closed spaces where one is able to build trust with like-minded people, both black and crucially white as well. Above all, for me, insurgency is about breaking a silence and speaking. Now, that's not saying that we should just force people to speak, because that in itself could be oppressive. Part of not speaking can be active resistance as well. But we do ultimately need to break this silence. And through this, realizing that you do exist, I exist. I do matter, we matter. I do have thoughts that can make a difference. And as my hero, really, Audre Lorde, the African-American writer, poet, teacher, and Sister Outsider, the book Sister Outsider, that is the one book. I mean, I read all sorts. I read Das Kapital, I read Hegel, I read all of that stuff. But then I got this book, Sister Outsider, this big. And it wasn't even written in an academic form. It was written in third person, first person, poetry, letters to Malcolm X. And all, that just totally transformed my life. And remember Audre Lorde, most of you would know, she was actually dyslexic. She was told she's thick. She became the librarian, New York librarian, and she was told she was thick. So her life, I think, and her teachings are just so important for all of us. So I'm just going to finish with a quote from Audre Lorde, and then I'll hand over. And this is what she said in Sister Outsider. I've come to believe over and over again that what is most important to me must be spoken. made verbal and shared, even at the risk of having it bruised or misunderstood. That the speaking profits me beyond any other effect. So I will keep on speaking and even tweeting. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. First, I just want to say thank you to Melanie for asking me to be here. I have mega imposter syndrome right now. Mega. I'm going to start with, I'm first and foremost a primary school teacher. I've been teaching for almost 10 years now, and I've recently gone into leadership as an English leader, my dream job. I'll start with a little story, because I don't think I would have been here in this position at all without Women Ed. It's a grassroots movement of women who promote the idea of choice and change. So you don't have to be a leader if you don't want to be. You don't have to be a man to be a leader. You can still be feminine and nurturing and kind and all those other things. So I got into leadership through that. But with that, I started writing a blog about introducing myself to Women Ed, and it started with the story of racism. At 11, I have this very vivid memory of we'd moved second time, third time, because I'd got into a really lovely school. But the neighbourhood that we moved into, for me to go to that school, wasn't very lovely. It was very racist. And I remember most days, 6 months at the start of secondary school, me and my sister and my mum, we'd park up, we'd quickly dash out of the car, run to the front door, because the neighbours would have their big dogs out there ready, shouting attack at us. And it's something that's always stayed with me. I didn't think I'd get so emotional. That's the first time I got emotional telling that. And then when I started my teaching career, first placement, it was in quite a racist environment. Again, I was like, I mean, how why does this keep happening? And there was one boy who I'll always remember. He had a problem with me because of the way I looked. And I could see it because I recognised the look in his eyes. There was always one brother when I was 11 in that garden who always looked confused. And this boy was looking at me in the same way. And I thought, okay, this is my opportunity now. I want to teach. I love teaching. It's what I want to do. And after that 6-week placement, he became like my favourite. I know you're not meant to have favourites, but he became my favourite one because I built a relationship with him based on kindness. And I thought, I could easily judge you for judging me, but you're a child at the end of this. There's only so much you technically will know. Your parents are telling you certain things. I've come in, totally smashed that stereotype, whatever you had of me. And he became someone who actually was quite nurturing himself. And he had a lot of anger issues. But I think at that point I knew, yes, I definitely am meant to be teaching. And then Women Ed came along, and so I definitely thought I could lead. I'm just going to sort of like dilly-dally around my notes, really, and hopefully it'll all make sense to you. I think for me, there were 4 questions that had come out on a tweet, and the last one, what are some of the strategies that can be used to prepare students and educators to engage in productive dialogues in the classroom and beyond about inequality and injustice? I think we need to start with having courageous conversations about race, and it's okay to say that word race and racism in a classroom. I think if we don't acknowledge it, then I don't think I'm enabling the children to have that conversation themselves. I think the one thing that I learned through education, and I won't tell you the whole life story, it's very tragic, but education empowered me. My mum fought for her girls to have education. It was something that we weren't meant to have because we were girls. My mum fought for us to have it. And I think for me, every child that comes into my classroom and every child that learns English in any school that I lead in, I want them to feel empowered and think as a critical thinker. I want them to question everything. I want them to question me. And they're 6, and it's a bit of a like shock at first, telling them, yes, you can question me. But they do, and I think for me, if they don't do that, I'm not giving them the tools that they need when they leave me. They should be questioning. If they get spoon-fed every single thing, they're not taking ownership of any of the knowledge that they have. Is it really their knowledge? So I think for me, to empower a child is to make sure that they question everything, including the teacher. I want to be questioned. And with my role as English leader, I think one thing that I was desperate to make sure there was a canon of literature in our schools that represented everybody. I love The Secret Garden. I think it is a beautiful text. Darren Shetty at Rap Classroom is an amazing speaker, and he'd said a lot about Secret Garden that I'd always been thinking, but I never really said out loud. When you think about Mary, she was ill when she was around the people of colour, but when she got to the green pastures of England, she was better. There's a lot going on there, really. And yes, it's a beautiful text. if you look at it from, you know, it's about nurturing, a garden's growing, she becomes kinder, the family, it's a lovely story. But there are little things in that text that actually make me feel uncomfortable. And so when I'm thinking about a canon of literature for children, who is it meant to be representing? Is it meant to represent anyone? I think it's supposed to represent all of us as human beings. So I'll reel off lots of books that you'll never have heard of, but I am. Bigu, Phoenix, these are all books about refugees or otherness, but they're written in a way where the universal theme is about being kind to each other. I, at my third school, did a little project because we had quite a few Syrian refugees coming in, and some of the white children were quite uncomfortable with them. They didn't know how to respond to them. I thought, okay, I'm not going to sweep it under the carpet. I'm going to bombard our class library with lots of books and stories about refugees. If you look at the news, have you ever heard a refugee child talk? Have you ever heard a refugee person talk? And with that comes unconscious bias, with that comes perceptions, and actually that's unfair on that other human being. We're putting all these things on them and they haven't had a voice, they haven't been given a voice. So books like Phoenix, books like Welcome to Nowhere, books like The Journey, they tell that human story. And first and foremost, children, all of us, we're humans. And I think there's always a universal theme, humanity, but also kindness. And difference is a universal theme, but it's nothing to be scared of. So I think, for me, story has been very, very powerful. And being able to lead in a school, Holyhead Primary Academy, which is a great school, you have to say that, and Shireland Collegiate Trust, the people that I'm working with, they get that. I've literally spent thousands and thousands of pounds on books, making sure that we have storyscapes in our classrooms about, you know, Russian folklore, about empowered girls. When we looked at recent research about BAME characters in books, there was only, I'm going to get this wrong now, 4% of main characters were BAME. We've just had a report come out today where 7% are now BAME characters who are main. I mean, it's a little bit of a difference. We've still got a long way to go. But I think it's important for children to recognise that story is a human thing and we can all learn something from everybody's story. And what Women Ed empowered me to do was give me a voice and share my story, which is now helping younger girls find fierce fairy tales. You know, we don't all have to be Snow White and Belle and things like that. So it's about smashing all these stereotypes of gender, of race, of cultures. I've lost my train of thought, let me come back. Secret Garden, Darren Chetty, we'll go back to him now. So he talks about it being a walled enclosure. Even though it's a garden and it should be nourishing and thriving, it's a walled enclosure because there's an imagination gap there. There's only so much that we're allowing our children to imagine. And it was one of the ladies that I listened to earlier on today who talked about imagination. Was it Zoe? Where is she? Was it you? Was it Paulette? Someone was talking about the attempt to retrain, it was you, Zoe. Yeah, the attempt to retrain the imagination so that there's always another possibility. There's not always one way of seeing something. And Darren Chetty's talk really made me question how I teach the children still. We're looking at the tunnel. Anthony Brown is an amazing author. He's brilliant. But it is very, very white, a lot of the stories. And also, Rose and Jack are very traditional white names. And then I thought, okay, am I enabling the children to diversify their writing, or are they just going to write about white characters? I've got Asian children, I've got Bangladeshi, I've got black children in my class. Have I enabled them to use, you know, words from their heritage, from their culture? Because actually it's worth something and it will make their writing richer, it will make the reading richer in our classroom. So I think for me, moving on from this as well, because I've had a lot to think about, bringing down the walls of imagination and making sure that we have a wide enough curriculum that enables children to smash the stereotypes, share different versions of different reimaginings as well. Little Red Riding Hood, there are loads of different versions of her. She's not a submissive character who gets eaten up by a wolf or the grandmother. There's books about her being the one who turns into the wolf. It's wickedly humorous. I read it to my children the other day in class and we just laughed for about 5 minutes afterwards. But for me, it's making sure that I'm giving them as much possibility as possible out there in the world. So that canon of text, I want it to make sure that it immerses a child in a new world, but opens up a conversation for them. I hope I'm making sense to you as I'm just reading off lots of stuff. The other thing that I wanted to sort of look at was, what does cultural capital mean? The trust that I am part of, we are very, very, very passionate about enabling our children to listen to Mozart, to listen to Vivaldi. But then Silhouette, you're taught this morning, why aren't we getting them to listen to some Jay-Z as well in the morning? And I thought, what actually is cultural capital to us? Whose reimagining of cultural capital are we looking at? Why can't classical music equate to hip-hop? And when we look at Beatles, it's rhythm and blues. Well, actually, there was something said a few weeks ago. Was that original music from the Beatles? Where did it actually come from? And my grudge about English literature, I love it, but Jane Eyre, for me, she's not a heroine that I can relate to. Antoinette, the mad woman in the attic in that story, she's a woman I can relate to. I don't think she was mad. And it really grates on me that actually more people should know about Why Is the Glass So Sea. It's an amazing literary text full of heritage, and actually it demonstrates that women, the way that they were represented at a certain time, completely unfair. But Jane Eyre, this placid, quite boring, I don't think she's great. I think someone like Antoinette needs to be celebrated more in literature. So I think, for me, thinking about Aristotle, I don't really agree with a lot of what he says. But then I do look at Socratic question and I think, yeah, that's what I'm doing, and I want my children to be able to do that in my classrooms. And then coming back to the reason why, Macpherson report, did any of you watch on Netflix When They See Us? Yeah. Oh my goodness me, oh, okay, no. I won't say much, but I just thought, oh my goodness me, 20 years ago this report came out about something absolutely awful that happened to Stephen Lawrence, but yet it was still happening to a certain degree, it still is happening. So I think there's still a lot for us to do, but I think for me, whenever I see any child, regardless of where they've come from or what their background is, there's hope, and children do question. They are curious, and they are meant to question, and I think as long as I make sure that they keep doing that when they leave my classroom and the school, then hopefully the world will be better. It will be. I'm going to leave it there.
I think this works, doesn't it? Okay, great. Thank you. My thanks, of course, to Melanie as well for inviting me to come and speak to you today. So my name's Kamna Patel. I'm an academic and I'm an associate professor at UCL. I teach development studies, and I'm also the Vice Dean for EDI, so Equality, Diversity and Inclusion, within our faculty, which is the Faculty of the Built Environment. And what I would like to do in my 10 minutes, it's going to be less than 10 minutes, I hope, is I want to give you a partial story of what I think my contribution is to radical pedagogies. And what I want to say is that to be radical is entirely contextual. So my research, until quite recently, has been on land and housing tenure in cities of the Global South. That's what I've written about. My first foray into race and writing about race was a co-authored conference paper at a very intimate workshop of my peers being fellow academics in human geography, urban studies, a bit of sociology. That's the fields that I was working in. And it was a positionality piece that argued for those who undertake a post-colonial analysis of elsewhere to consider and think more deeply about the post-colonial politics of the academy and their complicity in silencing voices of the already marginalised. This was a paper that drew on autoethnography, and in it I referred to my own experiences as evidence. Now then we get to the Q&A. So this intimate grouping was about 40 people. Myself and my co-author were the only people of colour. Everyone else was white. I don't know if that needed to be said, but it was. So questions 1 and 2. This is the end of a conference, so you only really get 3 questions. Questions 1 and 2 told me my experiences were not evidence. And they told me they may have not have anything to do with race. So that would probably be familiar to anyone that talks about race in an audience that's not primed for it. The questions simultaneously de-skilled me and removed my expertise. Now, if we remember that these are my peers, these are fellow academics. The third question, and that's the question that stung, was a young white woman who expressed sympathy when I had regaled them with my stories and asked, what can she do and how can she be better? And my reply upset her. At the end of that day, we had a very awkward conference dinner. There were only about 4 of us in the upstairs of a restaurant somewhere in a city I won't name, and she avoided me the whole time. And there was a real heavy, heavy tension in the air. So what did I say, right? What did I say that was so hurtful? I told her that her question has a long history behind it. I told her that I could not answer it, that I didn't know. I don't know what she can do and how she can be better. Furthermore, I refuse to answer. I, as a woman of colour, refuse to take her burden. I refuse to take the intellectual labour of thinking for her. And I refuse to plot how she can be a better person. I won't cut yet. It's a response that I still stand by, but it is one that has evolved. I am an educator, like my fellow panellists, and I have chosen in my Vice Dean role to take on an institutional role that puts me in a position to teach others. And I have come to recognise that left unsupervised, my white colleagues/students can sometimes draw out the wrong lesson. For example, using intersectionality to mean everyone in a way that is utterly divorced and completely unrecognisable by any black feminist or black feminist writing. So the story of my contribution to radical pedagogy is embedded in my context, which at UCL is one of overwhelming whiteness. I don't just mean whiteness as an idea, I mean as embodied in white bodies. The story of my contribution is one of guiding my colleagues to think about race, to think about their race and its impact on not only the world around them, but its impact on the world around me, my world. So, careful supervision and guidance of students who are also my colleagues. As far as pedagogy goes, it's really not radical. Thank you.
I want to thank you, all three of you, for fantastic presentations, really stimulating, really thought-provoking. I will not use esteemed again. I'm going to introduce panellists. Okay, so I just wanted to open it up to the floor. Does anybody have any questions?
Sorry, I didn't catch your name.
I'm Gurnam.
Gurnam. You use the term dangerous with regards to ontology and epistemology. Could you possibly expand on that, why you take that view? It's interesting.
Yeah, because most of us make assumptions about ourselves and the world and our position in the world based on the information that we're presented. And what ontology and epistemology does is enables us to question the assumptions upon which we receive information and knowledge. And that's why when I was at school, I think I was always a kind of a philosopher, but I was encouraged to do metalwork and woodwork and pushed away, and science, but pushed away. And I always remember Alex Haley's autobiography of Malcolm X. And of course, you've all had the careers lesson. And it's Malcolm's telling, what would you like to be, Malcolm? I think he said, I want to be a lawyer. He said, no, you're good with your hands, Malcolm. Like your dad, you'd be a good carpenter, yeah? And so in some senses, he was denied access to ontology and epistemology. Of course, when he went to prison, he read the whole of the Western canon and then went to the Oxford Union and destroyed those very same people who, pride themselves on the canon. So that's why it's dangerous. So philosophy is dangerous. Teach your children philosophy. Why is it that elite schools teach philosophy, period? And the kind of schools I went to, one last story. I went to a school in Bradford. Anybody from Bradford? Where's Sandra? I went to Fairfax School, which used to be a grammar school that had been, disestablished. It still had some trappings of the grammar school. And we had this one, Mr. Mitchell, English teacher. He used to wear the robes. It was like this kind of old Oxbridge kind of don that was living in a different age. And all the curriculum had changed. But he used to put on lunchtime classes on the Greek tragedies, Sophocles, Oedipus, on Ionic and Gothic orders and, Roman pillars and things. And I used to be a real rough kid. I used to be like one of these top 4 in the school in terms of fighting. So I used to sneak into Mr. Mitchell's class So I'm on the streets talking about street things, and then I'm learning about Gothic orders and Oedipus. But that was the only philosophy that I could access. So I do pay homage to Mr. Mitchell for making me this radical insurgent. And that proves that white people can be partners in this revolution. And this is the important thing. Whiteness is not about white people necessarily, just like blackness is not about black people. It affects us all, and somebody said the radiation of racism affects us all. So we have to keep fighting I still feel like an imposter. It probably will never go away from us because the radiation of racism keeps kind of irradiating us, yeah? We just have to become stronger.
Any other questions from the floor?
I really appreciate the last speaker and mention of intersectionality. So I sit on the Venus one, and also you see now intersectionality creeping into applications, being totally misrepresented, being used as you say, with everything. So black woman has a particular intersection that doesn't apply to everybody, and yet that word is used to say, well, this course can apply to everybody. Everybody sits on an intersection. I mean, I have a son with special needs, and you see the same thing there. Everybody says, well, everybody's on the spectrum, of autistic behaviour. And I think we've got to sort of push back against that. I don't know what your feelings are on that, because it kind of spears out identity. And I just wonder what you have to, how do we resist this? How do we make sure that it's not redefined in order to be smeared out?
Well, maybe we should all subvert our next Athena Swan applications.
Yes.
Maybe we should all use intersectionality as it was intended, with a long foot list and reading list as to why. One option. One thing that I have done within my own institution is I held a workshop for the senior management team. I was invited to do so by our EDI group on intersectionality. I co-facilitated it with a colleague in EDI, and we went back to basics. Everyone in our senior leadership team is white, most are men, and they sat there for 2 hours and they listened to me tell them all about Kimberly Crenshaw. And I produced a glossary for them, and this is what I mean about how my position has evolved. And I don't feel, for me, and it will not be the same for everyone, that I can say to white folks that ask me how they can do better to say, just do your own research as much as I want to. I think I need to drip feed some information. So I produced a glossary included in that included terms like misogynoir, and it included white feminism within the quotes and the scare quotes to explain why it's there. And it takes that kind of labour, that kind of back to basics about why these terms are not only problematic, offensive, why they are offensive, and how they work within a political climate to silence all discussions of race. So that was within our leadership team, with the hopes that actually in a place like UCL there should be enough clout to be able to push back.
Thank you very much for the presentation. It's been quite interesting to hear such a range of views. I'm reflecting, I consider myself as a scholar activist because I'm quite interested in scholarship. I'm also interested in how knowledge is applied and how it leads to change. My situatedness as an academic actually impacts on what I do. But I just constantly reflect on the fact that configurations of ways of doing and being are sometimes beyond what we can affect within the structures we operate from, whether you're black or white. And as a black academic, or as black academics, do you really think you're making any difference? Do you think you're really making any change, or are you just eating your passion?
There's a question.
Well, one of my PhD students is in this room. Maybe she should answer the question. But I'll tell you, because over the years I do bump into former students, black and white students, and they say, I had one yesterday who was from Guyana, she said, your lectures were transformative. You introduced Audre Lorde to me. She's a revelation. And so I think we can in small ways, because that's why we're educators, isn't it? I mean, you know, sociologists are talking about agency and structure. I believe in both agency and structure. You know, they kind of work. One, in a sense, needs the other. And so, yes, otherwise we should pack our jobs in. In fact, it would be unethical for us to do our jobs then. It'd be unethical.
I think we do both simultaneously.
Yeah.
I think that we teach and we use our powers in ways that can have a positive effect. At the same time, I'm very conscious that, particularly within the role that I hold, I'm also doing the job of being the face of institutional betterment. They happen in tandem, but I am conscious of it, and I hope to utilise that latter to do the former.
In Bell Hooks, in her book, you know, Teaching to Transgress, she says what we can do is like enable people to riot. And this kind of spontaneity from passivity, all of a sudden we start rioting. And I think that's kind of what we're trying to do, is enable people to riot. Now, riot, again, is another dangerous word. But actually, in the classical sense, rioting was the way in which society's changed. And we're talking about change, aren't we? So yes, we need a paradigm shift. Let's all riot.
That's why you were in the speaking into the class, because you were thinking fine.
Yeah. Are you going to encourage your pupils to riot?
Yeah, all the time. I riot.
Sort of building on that and coming back to the theme of the talk, which is about Macpherson 20 years on, 19 years on, sorry. And for me, when I was just getting involved in education at that time, it presented a high watermark in that the establishment at that time in some way recognised the duties and some sort of commitment towards equality, in relation to race. Obviously, the world's changed, and the systems that are in place there have been very much through neoliberalisation, fragmented. So what I'm interested in is what sort of new ways in which agency is occurring for yourselves in practice and collective agency, because myself yourself would have been involved in lots of campaign groups and political organisation. Going back to organisations like the BPA in the 1970s and so on as well.
Yeah.
Do they still present a way of collective agency, or what were the forms that we need?
Yeah. I'll just say one thing, because I was involved in Black Progressive Youth Association, anti-Asian youth movements and things. When I talk to the students of this generation, they don't even know that. Forget about our history from, the East India Company or slavery, chattel slavery. They don't even know the migrant history in this country in the 60s and 70s. And when you tell them that, they then realise all this intersectionality stuff and abstract concepts around equality and diversity and, dare I even say, anti-oppressive practice become meaningless, because the struggles, as Audre Lorde said, when white feminists were saying to her, you should be a sister, she said, you sisters are busy destroying families. The family is the only safe space I've got left. Why should I destroy the family? So, you made those strategic alliances, political alliances. So that's why I say these struggles are never abstract. You can abstract it from the real lived experience. And this is part of that struggle. Where it'll end up, I don't know. And so don't deny the participation in these movements. In many ways, I think we should see them as movements and not as a Athena, Swan or whatever. We're part of a movement, and we need to engage others as part of that movement. Otherwise, it's a neoliberal project. And I don't want it to be a neoliberal project. Yeah.
I think that maybe where these movements are is different. I think where they've changed is different. And for me, it's being attentive to the times, being attentive to the moment. So, for example, I can't remember, I think it's a member of the audience sort of said that maybe we all identify as black. Maybe some do. I don't. I'm actually very attentive to the divisions that occur within the clustering of BAME, and I am I identify as a woman of colour, not as a black woman, precisely because I have no interest, no desire to override the experiences of black women, and I wish to present myself as an ally to that group in particular. There is a nuancing, there is a changing of some of these debates that it is incumbent on us to be alert to. And Twitter has been an education for me. I only joined a few months ago, but wow, my mind has been blown by the things that I encounter. And that's a different space, right? Who would have thought you can have meaningful debate, meaningful conversation, meaningful allyship in a few words? Yeah. But you can.
Okay, we've got two questions, but I'll come to you first.
Respond.
Sure. Take the next one.
Does anybody need a mic, by the way?
Oh my.
Just for the second speaker, thank you so much. In the afternoon session, I was with a speaker called Petel, who presented a quote about how teachers are the decisive elements in the classroom. I think what you're doing is extremely powerful. But I do think in higher education, we have more of a luxury and more freedom to present some of the decolonising and the radical pedagogies that we want to. Just some advice from anybody about how we can empower and enable teachers that are working within a very stale and narrow curriculum to be able to engage in some of the creative abilities that you're
Yeah, I think that for me, like, I'll never see it as stale or narrow, because I think if I see it that way, then that's what I'm going to deliver to the children. It makes me uncomfortable. I think we definitely need to question. We keep questioning. As Shiloh Collegiate Trust, we've rewritten our curriculum quite a lot as well, so that we've put in certain things that we completely believe our children are entitled to learn. But I think there's also other things that when we're teaching history, are we teaching it from multiple perspectives, or are we just teaching it from that one perspective that's always been there and always, well, won't always be there. It can't, because we need to keep questioning it. I think you need to be brave, and I think being an academy to a certain degree does give you more freedom as well as to what you can teach. But with certain surveys coming out about CLPE and reflecting realities, so that's about reflecting all realities, I think teachers need to be aware of that, and I think initial teacher training is something that I am very interested in, because they've come to me, and I did a training session this week, and a lot of it was very new to them. I was like, but if I know it, and I'm in this, been here for 10 years now, I want to keep current. I always will do. I think it's ensuring that all teachers want to keep current and keep learning, because if I stop learning, I don't know how well my children in my class are going to learn from me. So I think as soon as a teacher stops learning, then not much is going to happen in that classroom. And I think it's about promoting skill sets and, you know, oral language storytelling and things like that as well. There's been such a big thing about handwriting, and there's some children that will never have the cursive joins. I'm not going to swear, I won't swear. It's, you know, that actually disempowers some children, so it's, you do give them the iPad, or you do give them some. I think it's about knowing your children, knowing that context, and making sure that you equip them the best way that you can by understanding them as human beings, not as a statistic, because that was, I didn't want to go into leadership because of that. They're not a statistic, they're a human being. And it comes back to stories, I think. If we're ensuring that they all have their story and they know it as part of a worldview, then they'll find something in the world that they'll be able to do. I hope that's answered your question.
Yeah, I was going to ask a similar question, but I just wanted to ask Kiran about the work that you do around refugee stories. I found that really interesting, and I just wanted to know what the response of the children was when you did that.
Children are very open-minded, and I think sometimes we discredit how open-minded they are. I think it was a shock for some of them. But I do book reviewing for Just Imagine as well, and they are very passionate about making sure that you have a range of texts that represent a range of people. So I've been given a lot of free books as well. I Am Malala was one of them, which actually was, I didn't think any of them would touch that one because she looked so different. It was interesting for me to see, are they going to pick that book up and read about Malala? And it was the boys, it was the white working class boys who were really into that story, and I think it was a safe space for them. That reading area became a safe space for them, and I think as long as children feel safe, they will question, they will explore, they will be curious, and I think it's ensuring that you're giving the opportunities to do that for them. But from that, dialogic teaching for me, I always want a conversation in the classroom, and I think making sure that I'm asking open-ended questions, it allows them to think freely as well, and giving the onus to them as well, the responsibilities to them to question a bit more and learn more about others. I think Malala, I think all of us can learn something from her. So it's equipping them with and being brave enough to sort of put certain texts in the classroom. Or I think when I did International Day of the Girl, that was another thing where we looked at refugee girls, and there was one image, and then there was another image of a really girly girl, and then lots of things about patriarchy came into that, and feminism and stuff like that. I think you need to be brave enough and give children that respect as well. You deserve to be speaking to me on the same level. I'm going to equip you with the language, and if you don't use it properly, then at least I can model it to them so they're not afraid of using it.
Okay, we've got a few more minutes. We've got enough time for another round of questions.
The first speaker, who was saying that effectively there will be no impact on the power structure without the markets. I think that something needs to be added to that. The markets will have no impact unless there is underlying threat of what will happen if the demands are not met. And when the question of writing came up, there was laughter suggesting that it's a throwaway comment and that there's no real intent for us to have riots. But I can recall in the 80s when there were riots across the UK, that was the only time I've actually witnessed our community having some impact on the power structure. So unless there's some underlying threat behind the demands, there will be no real impact.
I think that's right. I think it was Oscar Wilde that said that the only thing that changes society is riots. So the kind of truism in that, because the system. But I think that you can, like at SOAS, we've had the students anti-racist education, and they got secured gains. So I think that we do need that kind of direct action. The problem is we've neoliberalised students. We've put, we take £10,000 away from them, and then we say, now you have to cash in your money. There's a kind of, so for them to sit and avoid classes, it almost becomes a contradiction. But you're absolutely right. I mean, at the end of the day, it's going to be from below. I think we can do a certain degree in the power structure, but we become co-opted. After, you talked about Scarman, after 81 riots, what did they do? They took all the rioters and gave them jobs in local authorities. Half of them ended up like me, still rioting. The other half became the new rulers. So this is the hegemonic, that's what Gramsci talks about. This is how hegemony works, So we just need to be aware of that. But yeah, absolutely, we should riot. But you can riot through different ways, through arts. You can disrupt. It's about being disruptive, isn't it? That's what we think. To be radical is to be disruptive. You can be physically disruptive. You can be psychologically disruptive. You can be disruptive with art. I think I'm visiting prof at University of Arts London. There's a huge issue there. This university that's supposed to be the world, centre for arts, it's so white supremacy. It's unbelievable. But they are being disruptive now there, students and staff.
I think what we're going to have to do is kind of continue the conversation later on, after the second panel, particularly when we have the networking reception. It sounds a bit kind of colonial concept, but but it's kind of. But I think. What's coming out from today's discussion, I think, which is really important, is the kind of the inherent urgency of the moment that we're in right now, and I think all three of our panelists have actually spoken to that moment, and so. I
just want to say the moment we're in now about the Brexit, it's nothing to do with Europe. It's about Englishness.
Yes.
This is what Paul Gilroy talks about, melancholia. This is their moment where they don't know who they are. The Scots know who they are. The Irish know who they are. They don't know who they are, and they're petrified that they'll split, and we'll have Yorkshire. We'll have a War of the Roses again, and we'll have Wessex, and we'll have Cornwall, this is what it's about. So the myth of Englishness is up for grabs now, and that's why Boris Johnson is there to try and resurrect that myth.
Okay, on that note, can we give our panelists a round of applause, please?